Greetings, fellow Trekkers and Trekkers. While we look at Season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, now continues on with the episode, The Siege. As the Bajoran assault vehicles approach Deep Space Nine, Sisko convenes with his crew and ops and announces his intention to stay and defend the station. He will allow anyone who wishes to leave to evacuate along with the station's civilian population, but the entire crew volunteers to stay with him and fight. Sisko tells his crew they have a lot of work to complete before the Bajoran assault vessels arrive in less than 5 hours. Various station residents react differently. Quark decides to sell seats on the evacuation vessels to desperate civilians by bribing less desperate ones, starting with Brother Rom, to stay behind and wait for the later vessels to depart. Jake, Sisko, and Nog realize that they will be leaving on separate runabouts bound for 2 different colonies, but are determined to stay friends. Keiko O'Brien urges her husband Miles to leave with her and their daughter, Molly, but to no avail. In Ops, Lena Law suggests that the Lunar V base may have sub-impulse readers that can deliver the pad evidence to the Chamber Ministers. Unfortunately, it was 10 years ago that his forces hid them from the Cardassians during the occupation of Bajor. It is unclear whether they are still there and capable of flight. Kira is willing to be dropped off so she can try, and Dax can help her with the technology. Just then, Odo drags Quark in to explain his plan. Sisko angrily grabs him, but then Dr. Bashir calls in to report the consequences of Quark's dealings. A flight of passengers surround the docking bay, thanks to his careless booking. Sisko goes and unsuccessfully tries to calm them, but Lee steps forward and manages to calm the crowd by making an appeal for Bajoran unity. As the last evacuation vessel departs, Quark rushes to the airlock, dragging a trunk filled with latinum, and insists that Rom is holding a seat for him. Bashir calmly informs him that Rom gave a seat away to a double girl and has escaped the station and left Quark behind. Six-speed Quark, I guess. Once the occupation force from the Bajoran militia arrives, the station appears deserted, with no sign of a Federation presence, but General Krim is highly suspicious. Its forces set up a base in Ops, and find that the security net is disabled and the Federation crew is unaccounted for, leading him to believe that they are still aboard. In particular, he tells the crew to scan the air ducts for organic matter, knowing all about Odo and his shape-shifting abilities. The USS Rio Grande drops Karen Dax off on Lunar 5, and, after a while, they locate one of the raiders. They get to work immediately. Dax mentions she intends not to have to get stuck eating the local Paluco, as she worries she may be allergic, due to the biochemical reactions between the host and symbiote enjoying Trill. Minister Jaro hails the station, and Krim's overconfident Lieutenant Colonel Day proudly informs him that the station has been captured and attacked him without casualties. Krim takes over and tells Jaro that their victory is not complete and the station's crew has been accounted for. Jaro orders Krim to capture Lena Lass alive, knowing that he will be an invaluable ally if they could win him over to their side, but dead, he would be a martyr. Back on Bajor, Minister Jaro promises Wynn that if the Circle's coup succeeds, he will ensure she has elected Kai. Kira and Dax manage to get the craft working, and Dax thanks Tobin Dax, whose knowledge heavily leaned on. Dax judges the engine not to be able to come back on again, so they quickly seat and start to take off. In Sisko's office, Krim considers his position, and that of the hiding Starfleet forces. Day wants to take them head on and argues with him. Just then, the station's sensor array is sabotaged. Krim's suspicions are confirmed, and the soldiers begin to sweep at the station. Meanwhile, the Starfleet crew, in civilian clothes, breaks with the rations in the station's access conduits and waits for movement. Odo reports a team moving toward Cargo Bay 6. Sisko orders Bashir's team to meet them, and they successfully capture the first 5 prisoners of war. Over the skies of Bajor, Dax is disoriented by the antiquated state of the technology, to which Kira tells her they are flying by the seat of their pants. Fighters have set them in a dogfight ensues. Kira takes a dangerous route of going into the atmosphere in order to level the playing field. O'Brien is working on a security panel while Lee covers him. One of Krim's forces pins him in, but Sisko's group comes from the docking corridor to cover them with phaser fire and a smoke screen. O'Brien and Lee escape the other direction, where Odo is waiting to turn to a tripwire. Meanwhile, Kira's plan successfully forces the 2 attackers to go to thrusters. Dax finds the phaser targeting lock is dead, so she'll have to aim manually. Kira flies the ship around and Dax eventually fires down one of the attackers. Unfortunately, the airman is still behind them, and, with a hit to a plasma conduit, they are forced to land. Krim's second-in-command, Day, corners Sisko, Lee, and O'Brien in one of Quark's holosuites. However, it's quickly revealed to be a trap, as Sisko and others are merely holograms. The door locks behind Day and his men, and Sisko's voice informs the soldiers of the Cardassians' involvement in the Circle. Day is beamed back to Ops so he may pass the information on to Krim, but Day chooses not to mention it, having dismissed it as a Federation deception. A scan for Federation communicators reveals they are somewhere in the Duranium shield conduits. Kira was injured in the crash, and so orders Dax to get the evidence to the Chamber of Ministers herself. Dax refuses to leave her, so they hide her in search parties. Kira goes unconscious from the injuries she sustained in the crash. On the station, Odo informs Sisko that the soldiers intend to flood the conduits with anesthizing gas. They have some time, so Sisko reveals his plan to at least sway Krim from the wrong side, and therefore the coup's chance of success. Lee needs a little convincing, since he's not sure of his ability. Bashir and Quark's group distracts the bulk of the Bajoran forces by making some noise and surrendering. Krim orders they captured and brought to him, then retreating to the office, after which Lee and Sisko capture Krim in an attempt to reason with him. Meanwhile, Kira wakes up at Vedic Borelli's monastery. Borelli has sent a search parties for them and helps them disguise themselves as Vedics to allow them to travel to the Chamber of Ministers. Once there, Jara immediately attempts to dismiss Kira as a troublemaker. However, she confronts him and everyone there about the Cardassian involvement, at which point Vedic Gwyn insists on examining the new evidence. Jaro, despite realizing that the evidence is correct and the circle is finished, announces he will cooperate with any investigation. Kira stands, expecting more resistance, but Jaro leaves the room without a fuss. Colonel Day returns to Ops to find Krim in conference with Sisko. Krim berates Colonel Day for withholding vital information from him, but Day scoffs that Sisko's lies were not worth passing on. Krim informs his subordinate that the evidence of those lies has already been presented to the provisional government, which has recalled him to Bajor, where he expects he will be asked to resign his commission. Day withers under his superior's cold fury, realizing his career is over as surely as Krim's, and then the dream of an outsider-free Bajor that Jara promised them all is now ashes. Krim formally returns control of DS9 back to Sisko and starts to exit Ops. In helpless rage, Day draws its phaser and takes aim at Sisko. O'Brien yells out a warning. Elena Lost jumps in front of Sisko, taking the full blast in the chest. Before Day can fire a second shot, Odo has him restrained. Lee dies within a few seconds, but not before giving an ironic smile, remarking that he's off the hook after all. Aww. Stayed together in Quarks, Sisko, O'Brien, and Kira reflect on recent events after things return to normal. Kira's devastated as she believed that when Lee returned, things on Bajor would get better, and wishes there were more heroes like him. Sisko reminds her that she's a hero herself, but Kira can't bring herself to appreciate the compliment and leaves the bar. O'Brien questions the image that Bajorans have of Lee Nalas. Everyone seems to remember him as larger than life and a military genius, yet the Lee Nalas he fought with was just an ordinary man. Sisko interrupts O'Brien and says that Lee Nalas was the hero of the Bajoran resistance, a man who showed amazing acts of courage, fought for his people, and died to ensure their freedom. That's how the Bajorans will remember him, and that's how Sisko will remember him. He deserves to be remembered that way. With that, the two officers then leave to reunite with their returning families. Aww. So anyway, let's take a look at some background information with this episode, beginning with the production. The Siege was the most demanding episode of the season for the special effects team. Gary Hutzel commented, quote, "It was a very big show. It had an odomorph, miniature photography combined with live action, a big phaser battle, and a flying dogfight, which amounts to a lot of effects." After seeing the script for the episode, Terry Farrell contacted Nana Visitor and said, quote, "My God, would we have to do next episode?" Farrell also commented, quote, "Because we were shooting 10 pages in 2 days, and it was a ship called a Rider, smaller than a runabout, we knew we'd have a lot of added actions to perform, and try to learn our lines over external sound and all the other confusion a small set would be hard." The Plaku Spider model was a favorite of Joe Longo. Longo commented, quote, "The effects guy found that. He was going by a garage sale and I got it for about $2. It wasn't hairy at the time. It was a plastic spider, mechanical. And it wasn't scary or ugly, just big. But it was exactly what I needed, so I got it from him. I took it out to the special effects shop and had them motor in it with a remote, then over to Michael Westmore and had him put all the hair on it and put in its teeth. The fine thing was, as I remember, that when we brought it up to Mr. Berman, he looked at it and he liked it. I showed him how it moved with a remote, but it was real slow. He said he liked to see it move much faster, so I sent it back to the shop and had them put a heavy motor in it. I brought it back up for him to look at it again. When I got there, I had the secretary open the door for me and had the spider run in the room on its own. They all did double takes and really liked it. You only see it real quickly in the show, because if you spend any amount of time on it, you could tell exactly what it is. Yeah. So let's look at some continuity surrounding this episode. Dax speaks about her second host, Tobin, as he mentioned as an excellent engineer. O'Brien mentions the Cardassian front. It was established in the TNG episode The Wounded that he fought in the Federation Cardassian War. Reference Rules of Acquisition number 31. Never make fun of a Ferengi's mother. And now finally onto some trivia surrounding this episode. Richard Baymire and Frank Langella are the only actors, besides the regulars, to write all 3 episodes in the Bajoran trilogy. This episode concludes the first ever Star Trek episodic 3-parter. Next was the Augmenard from Borderland Station The Augments during Star Trek Enterprise Season 4, and 11 years later. This was subsequently followed by 2 others. The Vulcan Reformation arc from the Enterprise episodes The Forge, Awakening, and Kira Shara, and the Romulan arc from Enterprise, Babel 1, United, and the Anar. Vedic Burley's name is misspelled as Barel in the opening credits. Wonder why that is. So I think this is a pretty good episode, and it's also a nice conclusion to the Bajoran arc from this season, so yeah. So overall, I give the episode The Siege 4 warp cores out of 5. Well, anyway, tune in a bit as we take a look at the next episode, Invasive Procedures. So, until then, live long and prosper, everybody.